Hello, BookTube. Well, the jury has spoken. I did a video yesterday. One of, I think, only two. I'm crushed by deadline work right now. I'm finding it hard to justify filming time in any way. I can't avoid it. I can't avoid Zoom meetings. A lot of Zoom meetings are professional, but I'm crushed with work. I am hoping that by Wednesday or Thursday of this week, that will alleviate or disappear completely, and I will be free to finish up the year on BookTube without this weight on top of me. But I don't know. I can't tell one way or another. But one of the videos that I made yesterday was a poem. BookTube unofficially designates Thursday as Poetry Day, where you read a poem. A lot of people only read a poem. They don't comment on it in any way. But I've taught poetry a lot, so I can't really bring myself to just read a poem and not offer you some palavering about it. And I read a poem yesterday for Monday, and I floated the idea maybe I'd read a poem every day this week, and that idea was popular. No idea why, no idea what's wrong with all of you, but I thought we would do it again. I thought we'd read another poem today. I've got another winner for you. It kind of breaks a rule of mine. Usually when reading poetry to you, I do not read works in translation, because I have more or less come around to an idea that I don't really like, which is that not a whole lot that's really brilliant is really translatable, whether it's poetry or prose. For decades, I vociferously maintained the opposite. Now, though, I've avoided reading poems in translation because I don't know that I'm reading you the poem. But then again, it's better than nothing. It's closer than nothing. And that's the way that these poems are embraced by a lot of people. This poem, for instance, appeared in The New Yorker, probably in the early 1990s, or something like that. So most of those readers will not have heard of the poet and will never read the poem in the original, which is in Spanish. So I'm going to read you the English translation. The translation is by Elizabeth Macklin. The poet is Lourdes Casal. Was a Cuban exile who went back home. But it was a bittersweet going back home. She still found a country to criticize. But before that, she was a powerhouse brain and a gigantic heart. And she wrote about the experience of exile, not just the political dimensions of it, but the personal dimensions of it, as well as any poet has ever done since Ovid, I think, in my opinion. And I have a poem of hers to read here in English. It's called Definition, and it's about exile. This is the poem. I'm going to try and get its weird, breathless cadence. It's very much got an intentional, headlong cadence. I'm going to try to do that, but pardons if I don't. Pardons always with daily poetry if I read it incorrectly. Exile is living where there is no house whatever in which you were ever children, where there are no mice in the courtyards or any starched spinsters at their weaving behind the jalousies. To be, perhaps, already irretrievably somewhere it is not possible to be struck crossing a street by the memory of how, precisely, on an afternoon of skids and escapades, that car crashed into the store, leaving its profile on the column where it remains to this day, despite countless coats of whitewash and too many years. That is Exile by Lourdes Casal. That second part, to be in exile, is to be perhaps already irretrievably somewhere it is not possible to be struck crossing a street by the memory of how precisely on an afternoon of skids and escapades that car crashed into the store, leaving its profile on the column where it remains to this day despite countless coats of whitewash and too many years. That image never fails to come to mind when I think about exile. The narrator of the poem is not talking about the grand monuments, the Washington Monument, the Statue of Liberty, the old country. That person is talking about what it means to be an exile, which means that the landscape that your memory over years, too many years, has populated not just with places, lampposts, storefronts, sidewalks, but also with the stories of those places that you will never see again. And the dents and the marks and the coats of whitewash in the place where you are, they have stories too, but you don't know them. That's what it means to be in exile. You don't know the stories of the place where you are. And even if you learn them, they'll never be your stories. Keep in mind the perhaps apocryphal stories about Ovid desperately learning the language of his place of exile so that he could write in it and talk in it. You never learn it. It's never yours, and you're never going back to where it was. That is definitely the case when it comes to exile. I would also point out a thing that Lourdes Casal, I don't think, lived long enough to know, which is that that is also the exile that means age. The old end up being this kind of exile, even if they stay right in their home. And that's exactly the way it manifests in their mind. They'll be walking down the street, but it's not the same street. They'll be looking at the buildings, but the buildings aren't the same buildings. There were once different buildings, or a field, or trees. And those things aren't ever coming back, but they were absolutely filled with memories. They are an acetate overlay on everything that you're looking at. And you are exiled from that just as surely as if the Cuban border had closed its doors to you. That also, has become over the years the context in which I think about this poem. There's a temporal exile as well, and it works the same way, where a part of you would like to go back to the place where all the referents are still there, and you know them, and you're part of them. And if you're exiled from your country, you can't do that. But you also get exiled from the past, and you can't do it there either. I just think it's fascinating. I just love it. In fact, if you'll indulge me, this is not a long video, just one more time, that final stanza. To be perhaps already irretrievably somewhere, it is not possible to be struck crossing a street by the memory of how, precisely, on an afternoon of skids and escapades, that car crashed into the store, leaving its profile on the column where it remains to this day, despite countless coats of whitewash and too many years. All the memories that are embraided in that, the car, the skids and escapades, the mark on the lamppost or the facade of the store that you see every time you pass it, and you're remembered of all of that every time you do. Oh, just exquisite. I think that's just exquisite. So that's your poem for today. We'll do another poem tomorrow, definitely. So I'll see you then. Thank you.